You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change. So those of you who've been subscribed to my podcast for a while, and especially about issues about masculinity and gender and so on, will know that one of the things that I argue about is that what we see as the sort of traditional masculine behaviour in men is socialised. It's got nothing to do with genetics, testosterone, but it's fundamentally an effect from how we are brought up. Now, interestingly enough, that is probably and continues to probably be the most contentious issue that I encounter with a lot of boys and men, is that they will often vehemently argue that this is how we are. Men are, sort of stoic and they're hunters or, in some instances predators, because that's just our nature. It's, and women, it's in their nature to be nurturing and, to bring children up properly and so on. Now, some of you may detect a slight note of cynicism in my voice. And you're probably right, I'm cynical about this sort of stuff, and I've been cynical about it for a long time, because when we look at other cultures, we do not get the same picture. Now, recently I was sort of, trawling through various news items and so on, and I ran across an article in the conversation titled "Like Father, Like Son." New research shows how young men copy their father's masculinity. Now, as you can imagine, this thing just popped. And so what I want to do in this episode is I want to explore what this particular piece of research found and what that fundamentally means for fostering responsible and well-adjusted young men, because we're having a struggle, right? So if I go back to the primary premise at the moment for a lot of us is that, men are struggling both in their physical and mental health. Yes, some people argue, men are exercising more, they're more body conscious and so on. And, obviously that's very healthy, they argue. Well, my argument is that that may not be the case, because it could be much more about being obsessive and narcissistic than it is about being healthy. So let's have a look at what this study actually pulled together. Now, it was conducted by the researchers from the University of Melbourne and Deakin University, and they examined the ways in which young men's expression of masculinity is influenced by their fathers. Okay, so remember, proposition is that masculinity is sort of like innate, at least traditional patriarchal masculinity, and the opposing side says no, i.e. I say it is a construct of socialization and society. Now, what they discovered was that sons generally emulate their father's behaviours and attitudes and emphasise the significance of fatherhood in the transmission of gender norms and the potential for challenging or transforming these norms, i.e., think about it this way. As the title says, like father, like son. So, what was the methodology about? Because that's in science, especially, and especially in the social sciences or psychological science, everyone goes, yes, but how was that done? How good was the research in essence? Now, I had a look at the research and I found, and I'm not, a statistician or anything or a researcher, but, to me, the way that they went about it made logical, rational sense, and it seems to be quite sound. So what they did is they carried out in-depth interviews with 20 pairs of fathers and sons aged between 16 and 20. And they were from diverse cultural backgrounds, okay? So they weren't just sort of white Anglo-Saxon privileged men. And the questions concentrated on work, emotions, relationships, and mental health themes. Now, interestingly, what they found was the study unveiled 3 primary ways in which sons imitate their father's masculinity. And I want you to really take note, because this is fundamentally important. From this research, we can, absolutely go into all sorts of directions for further research. So the first thing that they identified was emotional expression. So sons frequently learn to express emotions in a manner akin to their father. Whether they suppress it or openly share their feelings depends on that relationship. This emotional modelling can affect the son's capacity to manage emotions and then to cultivate healthy relationships. Now, again, one of the sort of things that I often get from parents, or at least from mothers more than dads, is that, they go, my son's hit 13 and these days all he does is grunt. Okay, that's the sort of stuff we're talking about. So we're actually talking about a very narrow emotional vocabulary if that boy is in a relationship with a father who has the same pattern of behaviour. In other words, the father tends to suppress expressing openly what they're feeling. The second area was work and career. And the researchers found that sons often adopt their father's work ethic and attitudes towards professional life, moulding their career aspirations and work-life balance. Now, one of the problems that I have to deal with a lot of men is that a lot of guys are fundamentally workaholics. They're locked into a pattern of behaviour that comes about from the need to be materialistically acquisitional. And there's a social demand in that. It's not just that they're ambitious, okay, or aspirational, is that there is a social expectation for this. And so what's happening is that in that area of life, the capacity to have a more intimate, closer, well-attached relationship with your son is actually challenged. It's not there. I mean, yes, on the weekends, Dad might take his son to sport and they go surfing together or they play basketball. But that's a very small part of their life together. A lot of boys are not exposed to a broad set of life situations where they can see their father operate. And from my perspective, I'm a realist as much as I am someone who's aspirational, and I like to think that we could change this because it's important that boys tend to have a bigger, broader experience of what dad's like rather than simply on a two-dimensional basis. Now, the third area, and this is particularly, again, confirmed, is the relationships and gender roles area. Okay, fathers often serve as the exemplars for how their sons should treat others, especially in romantic relationships. The study discovered that sons tend to mirror their father's attitudes towards gender roles, and the problem with that is that it fundamentally perpetuates traditional gender norms. Okay, so herein lies the split between where society is looking to evolve to, and a lot of men hanging on to the sort of dinosaurs of the past. Man is this, woman is that, and never the two shall meet. This is seriously, individually, and from a relationship point of view, unhealthy, and it's socially unhealthy as well. So the thing that we've really got to pull together is okay, well, what does that mean? Well, fundamentally what this means, folks, is that we as dads have a massive responsibility in what happens to our sons and how they grow up and whether they become, well-rounded, emotionally mature, emotionally regulated. Remember in the last episode I talked about, the emotional Bermuda Triangle a lot of dads find themselves in, excessive anger, guilt, anxiety, and we go round and round and round these emotions until we sort of, wear out, we burn out. And unfortunately, our sons are burnt out by this behaviour as well. So, we need to really take a hold of this. If we want to see some positive change, it's not sufficient for the politicians and social organisations to throw tons of money into this bucket and then hope for the best. The change quite literally begins at home. All right? So this research has opened up and provided valuable insights into the ways young men imitate their father's expressions of masculinity. If it's two-dimensional, if it's binary, if it's based on the traditional values of, sort of suppressing emotions to being, exclusive, it's us versus them, hierarchical, i.e. status and prestige conscious, acquisitional, competitive. Those boys are going to model that, and they're going to actually dial it up an inch or two more. So by comprehending this process, we can better support the development of responsible, well-adjusted young men and work very strategically towards dismantling detrimental gender norms. I want my son and my grandsons to relate to themselves and to especially women, but also other men in a healthier, well-rounded, human way, not the, slapping your chest, testosterone, maybe not testosterone, but steroid-driven masculinity. Huh? The research has shown that adherence to traditional gender roles and expectations can quite negatively impact mental health of both men and women. We know this. Men who rigidly adhere to traditional masculine norms, such as emotional stoicism, dominance, control, and aggression, are at a higher risk for mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. I'll throw in gambling there too. One of my bugbears at the moment, every time I turn on SBS, there's just a string of ads for gambling apps. I work with people who are trying to give up gambling and they can't watch the station because they just get triggered all the time. There's no social responsibility in this, folks. It's about time, the media took on a much, much more socially responsible attitude and control what it is. It's not just all about money. We're worried about, the fall of democracy. Well, it starts with little things, folks. So, the question arises, well, why is it that much, much more egalitarian attitudes by men improve mental health? Well, because one is that they tend to seek help for emotional problems a lot earlier, and they, distance themselves from social pressures and expectations. And then they try as much as possible to build better social support networks. So, to round it off, one of the things that really is important here is that men who embrace a more egalitarian approach to gender roles and engage in supportive, nurturing relationships tend to have better mental health and an overall better well-being. And so it doesn't take billions of dollars to fix this problem. It does take some amount of money, obviously, because we're at a point where we do need to educate and provide counselling, therapy, coaching to help men step into a healthier space. So I hope that gives you some food for thought. I do really want fathers to take notice of this, and it's just, the interesting thing is that this has implications for research in so many different fields. For instance, what is it that we know about father-daughter relationships? What is it that happens with a very patriarchal father and his daughter or daughters? Okay. So this opens a whole bunch of research, and one of the pieces of research that I'd like to sort of see emerge is the impact and the validation of the four horsemen of the apocalypse in patriarchy, which is, being exclusive, hierarchical, acquisitional, and competitive, and to look at how that can directly, flow into, the social fabric and the impact that has. All right, let me thank you for joining me today, on the importance of responsible fatherhood and shaping your son's masculinity. It's an important topic. Don't neglect it. So I hope that you've gained a much, much deeper understanding, if you haven't already, of your role in your son's life. And believe me, it's not all about sport and it's not about fun or all about fun. It is about some fun, obviously. But you need to reflect on how am I, as a father, in myself, and what is it that I'm expressing in my behaviour. So please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. We're going to have lots of more thought-provoking discussions on a whole bunch of topics. So until next time, hope you are inspired, and I hope you inspire others to be the best version of yourself. Until next time, this is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.